in many respects, they're just like a case in a city, right? They're little cities floating out there. There are towns in the United States that are smaller than what some of these cruise ships take out. There are 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 people are on board. And then that's not including the crew.
Mm-hmm.
So you can imagine that all the things that happen in a city can happen on a boat.
Howdy, and welcome to the show. Cooper's Code focuses on legal issues and notable practitioners, distilling wisdom so we all achieve the best results for our clients. I'm Miles Cooper, and I'm thrilled to share part 3 of this conversation with Gretchen Nelson. The other piece that we haven't touched on is the cruise ship and maritime side.
Oh, yeah.
And that looking at the 3 things that you do, all of them sound fascinating, all of them sound complicated, and all of them are very different.
Yeah.
So tell me about how you ended up
doing the cruise, the maritime.
Yeah.
That's actually a very good question. I guess it's probably a little bit of an offshoot of the aviation side of things, but somebody came to me with a case. So nobody knows this. These people go on these cruise ships, and there will be one thing written on my gravestone. Actually, 2 things. One will be she wanted a continuance. And the other one will be she never went on a cruise.
And was this pre-COVID or after COVID?
Oh, pre-COVID.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God, yeah. No, I started doing cruise cases back in the late 90s.
Okay.
Early 2000s. The companies there's been obviously mergers and acquisitions, and some companies that were separate are now combined into one. But they all have a ticket, quote, and a passenger bill of whatever, and a lading bill kind of thing. And they have to be sued, or they basically mandate that they be sued in certain areas. And so Princess has in their ticket a clause that says you have to sue them in Los Angeles.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
For some reason, I thought almost all the crews had
Florida?
These for Florida. Yes.
Some do.
Okay.
Princess has California. Cunard has California. Holland America has Seattle. Royal Caribbean, Norwegian, and I think a couple of the other ones are in Florida.
For somebody who doesn't cruise, you know all of the
yes.
all of the carriers.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a critical issue. And I feel so badly because sometimes people will take these cases on and they have no idea that they have to sue them. And now they're making you sue them in federal court, right? So, and the U.S. Supreme Court has endorsed this, which makes me crazy. They did it at a time when the industry was different and the times when marketing was different. And they kind of felt that, the argument made was, look, they travel all over. You got to find one place you could sue them because it's not fair that they be sued in Nebraska or South Dakota or something, which I think is a little crazy. They should be. They sell the tickets to people there. But anyhow, so we get a case, and I had a case years ago when I was at Kornblatt and Seltzer. We represented the fishermen and other businesses as a result of a oil tanker off the coast of Huntington Beach that ran over its anchor and spilled a lot of oil. So I'd gotten involved in the area of maritime back then. And then I had a friend from years back who represents Princess. And so I wound up filing a couple of these cases, and we started working on them, and I really liked them. They're, fascinating because in many respects, they're just like a case in a city, right? They're little cities floating out there. There are towns in the United States that are smaller than what some of these cruise ships take out. There are 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 people are on board. And then that's not including the crew.
Mm-hmm.
So you can imagine that all the things that happen in a city can happen on a boat, right? From people getting ill to people becoming ill independent of something that happened on the ship, and going to the hospital that are on. I mean, I have this fight with them all the time. They say, we don't have hospitals. And I said, well, yeah, you do. You've got 2 doctors, 4 nurses. You can do x-rays. You can treat people. I don't know what, you've got a whole physician staff group that monitors it. You can contact people. It's like, I think you're doing hospital work there. But so people slip and they fall. Something happens. The boat gets into an area it shouldn't get into and it runs aground. I mean, any number of things can happen. And they're really fascinating for the same reason, in some respects, as securities cases are. The law is very unique. There's all sorts of areas you have to go through in it. There's a lot of research and writing, so a lot of those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, they're always very empathetic stories and sometimes tragic. Sometimes their injuries are bad, but the person recovers, which is great. But some people die, and your heart is just, you're wrenched by what goes on. And then they're there and they've gone out on this, they're on a vacation, right? And it all goes sour. So it's sort of, again, this like an aviation case in some respects. You're, traveling, you're going away maybe for a vacation. The next thing, or coming home from a vacation and things go south. So.
Is there any particular type of case that whether it be an injury case or other piece related to that, or?
The ones I've done I did one that was a kind of a crazy contract issue, but mostly they're injury cases of some sort, or death cases.
Pivoting a bit to leadership roles, I understand at this point you have a what I would describe as a significant leadership role with the Judicial Council.
Well, I'm on the Judicial Council. I think that's so sweet of you to say that it's a significant role. It's a significant role to be on it. That's true. I play a kind of, there are 4 lawyer members of the Judicial Council. The rest of them are judges or CEOs of courts. This will be my 3rd term. And it is extraordinary to be on it, to see and to play a minor part in the development of what is the largest judicial system, I think, in the world.
In order to unpack this a little bit, I think all of us who are lawyers should know this, right. but many of us probably don't. I had to ask you some questions about what this was. What role does the Judicial Council play as far as the operation of the courts and your involvement with that?
So the Judicial Council is basically the operational arm of the courts. The head of it is the Chief Justice. And everything about the running of the courts as one large body is basically run through the Judicial Council. So as many people know, I mean, let's go to the simplistic thing of the facilities. When Ron George was Chief Justice, he undertook to unpack the facilities from the counties. And by the facilities, I'm talking about the trial courts. I think the appellate courts and certainly the Court of Appeal are always owned by the state. But the counties were the ones that built the courthouses for the trial courts, and they ran them. And that was a good thing, and it was a bad thing. In a county like LA, which is a large county, sometimes there's probably more money county-wise to maintain the infrastructure than a smaller county in Northern California or Southern California. So they took them, I guess is a better way to say it. And the county then no longer had any responsibility. So now these buildings are all owned by the state. And that means the Judicial Council and its facilities group are responsible for budgeting for building new ones, fixing the ones that are there, figuring out how to build new ones when you have, it's very difficult. I mean, LA Superior Court, the main courthouse, Mosque Courthouse in downtown LA, is enormous. And it's probably It's not surprising, and it's nothing that anybody doesn't know. It's got some of the most concerning geological cracks, I guess.
That's euphemistic.
Yes, it probably will not do so very well in an earthquake. So how do you take what are probably 75 courtrooms and move them out, take that down, build a new one? What do you do? How do you put it? So that's all done by the Judicial Council. The budget, how much money trial courts are allocated, how much money the appellate courts are allocated, is all a function of decisions made through the Judicial Council. And it's not just the large board, if you will, of the Judicial Council that does it. There's massive numbers of people that are involved. They have a large staff, but then there are all these wonderful committees, all these judges and CEOs and people who work, and lawyers from all walks of life, from legal aid to whatever, who are working on these committees to work through all these issues. It's the Casey Committee, on both on civil and criminal. Then you've got the Rules Committee, making up all the rules of court. There's a legislative committee on the Judicial Council that works with putting together any legislation that the courts would like, and also overseeing the impact of legislation. I mean, it's amazing what they have to consider and review. I don't know how many bills get thrown up in Sacramento every year, but it's probably thousands and thousands and thousands. And they're being reviewed for all sorts of things, not only what the fiscal impact would be on the court, but other issues that may impact the court in terms of it. There are committees that deal with civil and small claims. And all of this all sort of migrates its way up to the Judicial Council, who then ultimately have to make decisions about recommendations on what to do. So there's roughly 6 meetings a year. There's a huge agenda. There's many things on the consent agenda. There's some things that are for discussion. So it's really quite an honor. I mean, every day that I am involved in dealing with it, and that's in some respects at least once or twice a week, you find yourself amazed at all of the work that had to go into running this court system. And I guess we don't think about it, right? You go to your local courthouse and, you walk in, there's a clerk there, and you figure somebody's figuring out how much to pay, but there's the court reporter issue. There's all these things, and they all migrated to one big organization. It's a corporation in many respects when you think about it. And somebody's got to run it.
How did you find yourself getting involved with the Judicial Council? Because it sounds both thankless and rewarding and time-consuming.
Yeah. As I mentioned before, there are 4 lawyer members, and there are the balance of I think there's probably 25 or so, are the Chief Justice, who is the head of it, Justice Corrigan, who is the vice chair, and then either trial court judges or appellate court justices and CEOs. Some of those are on because of their positions. So, for example, the head of the California Judicial Association, whoever is the president, sits for one term the year that they're that. The lawyer members are nominated to the Chief Justice from the State Bar. And the State Bar, when I was on the State Bar, they had a very precise process for how that would occur. There is, just like anything, there's a lot of committees on the State Bar. There's sections, there's whatever. And people can apply. They have an open period of time when applications are available, and you can fill them in and you send it in and apply to participate. So when I was on the State Bar Board, I was the head of the nominations committee for a period of time. And we were the people that would vet these applications that would come in. And I understood the role of the Judicial Council. I knew how important it was. I was always very careful when we were obtaining applications to make sure that the nominations committee reviewed those carefully, just like they were reviewing everything carefully. The Jenny Commission is another one that the nominations committee would vet the people who were applying and then make decisions. So I cycled off the state bar. And a few years after that, I think I went off in 2013, Jim Fox had been the president of the state bar. He was a wonderful man who was a former district attorney down, I think, in San Mateo or Alameda County. And he died a few years back. But Jim asked me if I would apply, and I did. And then I was selected, and that nomination goes to the Chief Justice, and the Chief Justice at the time was Justice Cantil Sakaue, and they accepted it, and so then I came on. That process still works. It's a 3-year term that you're on. I wound up being asked to extend my term because it ended in the middle of the pandemic, and everybody was it was just a terrible time, and there was so much that the JC was being asked to do and the Chief Justice was being asked to do because of the pandemic, not the least of which were all the emergency rules and everything that was happening. And since I had some institutional knowledge, having been on for 3 years, they asked me to stay on for another 3 years. Then there was a switch over for when Justice Cantil Sakaue retired and Justice Guerrero came on. There was another request asked because, again, I had more knowledge at that point in time of all the things that have been going on, and we're still sort of a little bit back in the pandemic then. So I stayed on. So I've been on for 3 terms, which is unusual, and I urge people to apply. It is very rewarding. It is very important. I got on that way, and that is the way that any lawyer member gets on. You apply. I have tried to encourage lawyers to make sure they apply. There's no guarantee you'll get it, but at least get your name in there. I think it's important if you do it that you be somebody who has had some leadership role, so you have an understanding of the importance of what's going on. Craig Peters was recently the most recent addition. There was a really lovely lawyer from LA who cycled off, his term ended, and Craig Peters is now coming on. And I think he'll be great.
He's got a little bit of leadership experience, doesn't he?
Yes, right. And that's important for a lot of different things. It's important because your leadership role sometimes takes you out of the insularity of just you're looking at what's important to you. With Craig having been president of CIOC, he understands that, as the president of CIOC, you can't just be looking out for the San Francisco lawyers. You got to make sure you're looking out for San Diego and everybody else. And that same thing applies in the Judicial Council. It's not what is important in your court. It's not what's important to you as a plaintiff's lawyer or a defense lawyer. It's what is important for the courts as a whole. And the one thing to keep in mind is that Judicial Council stays away from policy. If there's a law that is coming up that has to do with whether it's right or wrong to allow prisoners to seek to have their sentence reduced, that's a policy issue for legislatures to make a decision on. The Judicial Council looks at that more in terms of what is the impact to the court, either fiscally or otherwise, because you have to make sure that the court can continue running. And if, you have a situation where you've got, 1 million applications being made to reduce your sentence over a period of time, you can clog up the courts and stop it, right? So does that make sense in terms of keeping in mind that you have to keep the cogs and the wheels moving? Civil lawyers have to make sure that they're capable of getting in to get their cases tried, both on the defense and on the plaintiff side. The family law people have to be able to make sure that their cases can be heard timely so that children's, decisions made as to children are taken care of. The same with probate and estates. And then the criminal cases have to obviously be to flow through the system. And so that's what the JC is looking at, keeping all the cogs and the wheels running in a way that makes it happen.
And I think a lot of lawyers don't really have that big picture experience. What they experience is, wait a minute, what do you mean my case is not going to be heard until 2026?
Right. And nobody can always understand fully what actually is going on. I mean, there is all this background that keeps it. I mean, from the physical building. I mean, poor LA County, there's a couple buildings where recently there were so many, plumbing problems. They had to close the courtroom.
Wow.
So you close not a courtroom, you close a courthouse for plumbing issues. You're going to get stacked up, right? It's like trying to get planes landed. It's, rack them, stack them, and pack them. You got to have them coming in. They got to land, and the other one's got to take off. And if somehow you screw that up and something can't land and something can't take off. And so it's really very, very interesting and very rewarding. And I do urge people who are interested to make sure they get an application in.
You rattled off that line as if you handle aviation cases.
Right. I think that was from some movie at some time.
I think it was Die Hard 2, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
So whichever airport Die Hard there was.
Right.
If you're enjoying what we're doing here with Cooper's Code, please extend our reach by giving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and consider sharing an episode with a friend. Additionally, we want to know who you want to hear on the show. Have an interview suggestion? Email us at podcast@coopers.law. One of the other things I noted just in going through your bio is some of the work that you did in various leadership roles with diversity and with gender in the law. What do you think has worked so far, and what would you like to see continue in that regard?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. The law is so much more diverse now. And by that, I mean it is diverse in the complexion, gender of judges, justices. You just have to look at the California Supreme Court to see there's more women than there are men. And the same, I think, is very true in the trial courts and the appellate courts. The law is so much more diverse now in who you see going into court as lawyers, who you see as litigants, who you see around the country as being involved in the law in some way, shape, or form. That wasn't true when I started. One thing that was true was that when I was in law school, there was actually not an equal split between male and female in law school, but it was pretty close. What I found was the fall off of women staying in the law after they got out. And that was a function of a lot of different things. I'm going to say, and hopefully not insult anybody, some portion of it was a function of women that I saw and knew who were uncomfortable being lawyers, finding a partner, raising children, and focusing on that. And there's nothing wrong with that.
And I want to probe you on that. Was that in part, do you think, because of the hostility to women in the law, or the hostility to being a parent in the law at that time with billable hours and other practice?
I think it was both of those and another issue, which is that I think that in some respects, women, I think, are more in tune with trying to figure out a solution to a problem and to do it in a way that is non-controversial. And so I think there is some measure of the population, this is probably not female-oriented, it can be male-oriented, that are not keen on conflict. And the law setting aside mergers and acquisitions, which probably has some conflict to it too, because you're negotiating, but the law is about conflict. And particularly trial lawyers, it's all conflict. The plaintiff has a position, the defendant has a position. And somewhere in the middle, the jury has to figure out who's right and who's wrong. And a criminal case is another example of it. That conflict can lead to either a good relationship between the two opposing lawyers, or it can be one that's not so good. And I think that I saw friends of mine leave because they couldn't do it. They didn't enjoy it. They weren't happy doing it. And so that led to some of it. There certainly is, it can't be disputed that some part of it too was, for a lot of firms that having a baby was not acceptable. I mean, go off and do that on your own time. And then there was some element of it, which is that, women, I think, just wanted to focus on their children, and there's nothing wrong with that either. So I'm not sure where I'm totally going with this, but I think that what you saw, and as I was kind of growing up, is that was more common, that kind of leaving the law. People of color coming into the law. That it was horrible. I don't think that there was not enough room. People weren't making way, and that's probably not the right way to say it. But there were barriers to that. I think some of the law schools in California that are California accredited only, and ones that are unaccredited, were able to provide a path for many of these people. And they came out, and many of them were terrific lawyers, and have gone on and been very successful in their careers. And so that was another opening there that was made available. And then people are more diverse now. People are more understanding of it. There still is horrible discrimination. I'm not going to suggest we're in any way in a perfect spot in life, but we've gotten to where we are as a result of a lot of effort by a lot of people pushing forward. And I know we talked at one point about this issue of, what did you do back in the 80s? And, there were people would say stupid stuff and you just kind of blow it off. And maybe I should have said something. Maybe I didn't. Sometimes I would say, wait a minute, that's not right. People are much more prepared to voice themselves now. And I can't answer the question precisely on why we did as we did, except that it was just the progression of time. And I know on the break we talked a little bit about. I love this book, The Boys in the Boat, which was a amazing story. It's now a movie. I did see the movie. The movie isn't as good as the book, but the movie is good and well worth seeing. But the thing that was most extraordinary about it is what that one young man went through as he was growing up with a father who left him at the age of 14 to live by himself and to make his way, and for him to go to college probably was not that unusual. He was probably not the only one who had that kind of a life experience. And some of that is just how we have progressed and gotten, in society. Now, that would never happen. Social services would be in there. And that's a good thing. But he survived. And from him has become this incredible development through to where we are today. So the survival of these kids has led to the survival of kids since then in different ways. And so maybe in some respect, lawyers that are of color, of different genders that have, moved and progressed through law through the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, basically we're all just pavers. at some point in time. We're part of the gravel in the driveway that everybody has to go up.
It's an interesting analogy. And for those who have not read The Boys in the Boat, it is a fantastic book.
Yeah.
I'll put a link in the show notes.
Yeah, no, it's amazing.
We've had quite a varied conversation. As we come to the end, are there any other things that you think our listeners should know?
This is always the question. This is the open-ended question you want the
It
juror
is.
to answer, right?
Yeah.
I would leave everyone with this. I have loved and still do love this profession. And probably it's one of the greatest professions in many respects because you can continue to do it until you're in your 90s if you want to. But I think the areas that I have found have provided me with such great satisfaction have been my clients. So hear and listen to your clients. They have a lot to tell you. There's a lot you can learn from them. And don't be shy about getting involved in organizations that can help you grow better, but also you'll make great friends. So friendship from clients, friendships from your fellow colleagues, both if you're a plaintiff's lawyer on the defense side, if you're a defense lawyer on the plaintiff's side, I think are one of the greatest things. I noticed that you're a member of ABOTA, and they have some wonderful programs and encourage the sort of camaraderie of this being a profession, which is really what it is. It's something that is and boy, is it needed more and more. As we go through life, we keep, it's the ups and downs, mountains, peaks and valleys, and we're kind of a little bit in a place that in some respects isn't great politically and division. And I think if lawyers get along, I think it sends a message to the rest of the world. So
one thing that I've loved about ABOTA is that we can be fighting and still be civil and have a good relationship.
Right. That's right. There's another American Inns of Court, which has the same sort of concept. It actually was started by my civil procedure professor.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So join those organizations. That would be what I would say to people, and participate and hear your opposing counsel. They teach you a lot. So I don't know if that helps you.
No, it's wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you for being here, Gretchen.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. It's been an honor.
Oh, it's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening today. Please email us at podcast@coopers.law with questions, comments, feedback, and suggestions for who we should have on the show. Like what you heard? Share us with a colleague and leave us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. To all of you doing justice out there, happy hunting.